Good afternoon, or good evening, I guess now. Good evening, hi. And happy post-Thanksgiving to each and all of you. I'm Mike Clouden, CEO of the Milken Institute, and delighted to welcome you here. We've got a very interesting evening in store for you, and I'm going to get to it right away. As you know, we've got Arthur Brooks, who's the president of the American Enterprise Institute. He's going to be talking about his new book, The Conservative Heart, How to Build a Fairer, Happier, and More Prosperous America. Before we get going, just a couple of things. First, just a reminder, our last major event of the year is going to be our California Summit, which is next week on the 8th at the Ritz-Carlton in Marina del Rey. It's an invitation-only event, but details can be found on our website, and we will be publishing reports that come out of it about suggestions as to what can be done to deal with a number of pressing issues facing the state of California, and all of the public panels from that session will be on our website, as are all of our public sessions from any of our events. Now, Arthur has agreed to stay behind after tonight's program to sign copies of his book, which is for sale tonight over in the corner, thanks to our friends at Barnes & Noble. And I think after you hear it in the discussion, I'm sure you're going to want copies, so it'll be right there. And also, he's agreed to field your questions after his remarks. Now, for those of you who've been here before, which is many of you, you know that we take questions electronically. So if you have a question, you send it anytime in two ways, either via text or email, and that was showing. I think we had a slide up there, and there it is again, okay, on how to do that. We found that by doing things electronically, we get far more questions in that way. We can't always get to all of them, so if you don't get to yours, please feel free to blame me.
But it keeps us from heckling.
Well, it kind of does that too, what can I say? But then again, you have more time for cookies at the end, so that's okay. There's some benefits to that. Okay, well, it's a very special pleasure to welcome Arthur Brooks here this evening. As I've said, he's president of the DC-based American Enterprise Institute, one of the nation's oldest and still the most vibrant think tanks. He was previously the Lewis A. Banzel Professor of Business and Government at Syracuse University. He received his PhD here in the neighborhood at the RAND Corporation, Graduate School of Public Policy. He is, among his many other things, he's a contributing writer to the New York Times editorial page. And if you haven't been a regular reader of his columns, I commend them to you. And I'd like to especially recommend his pre-Thanksgiving piece that appeared just last week, Choose to be Grateful. It will make you happier. It really is a wonderful piece, and among other things, it will enlighten you on what the pumpkin pie paradox is, which you all should know. So we're really grateful and happy to have Arthur Brooks here today, so I turn it over to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike, and thanks to all of you. What a delight to be here. This is a place that I called home for several years. My first son was born up the street at Santa Monica Hospital, and it's a place that really has a special place in my heart. It's also beautiful. Coming from D.C., where it's 38 degrees and drizzling, I can tell you this is not really heavy lifting for me to join you here tonight. Thank you for taking some of your time to hear about this book that I've written and to have a discussion about what's going on, not just in our economy, but what's going on in our society and how we can balance some of the ideas that are in the public policy discussion today. As you heard from Mike, I'm president of the American Enterprise Institute, which is a DC-based think tank. That hasn't been my whole career. I was a college professor before that, and actually it was an even more winding road than that. Before I came here to Santa Monica, the great Pardee Rand Graduate School to do my PhD, I was actually a French horn player. I spent my 12 years making my living as a classical musician, and a lot of those years were in Barcelona when I was in the Barcelona Symphony. Why do I bring that up? Because that was a time when I started a quest, a vision quest, to find meaning in my life and meaning in my own career. And I'm going to tell you the story because it bears on what I'm going to talk about tonight. When I was 19, I dropped out of college. Dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And I was actually studying at Cal Arts, the California Institute of the Arts, up in Valencia, just up the grapevine. And it didn't work out. I wasn't ready. I left college, and I went on the road playing music. I played chamber music for a long time. I spent a couple of years playing on tour with a guitar player named Charlie Bird. And then I wound up in Barcelona. And when I was in Barcelona, I started to look around and ask myself, because by this time I was in my late 20s, what is the meaning of my work? Now, people ask you all the time, you're successful people, they ask you all the time, what do you do? Does anybody ask you, why do you do it? Not so much, right? Why do you do what you do? And I became interested in the answer to this question. Why was I playing in the Barcelona Symphony? And I started looking at the people I admired the most and their answer to that question when I could find it. So here's the person that I really admired very, very much in my life. It was a composer, my favorite composer. You know this composer if you know anything about music. You can be, first semester music appreciation, you know this composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. One of the greatest composers who ever lived. 1685 to 1750 is when he lived. Incredible composer, prolific, productive. He published more than 1,000 works in his lifetime, choral works, orchestral works, chamber works, cantatas, chamber music. By the way, he also had 20 kids, which is productive. But that's not what my point was. I was looking at a minor biography of Johann Sebastian Bach when I was playing in the orchestra in search of meaning, the why of my work. And something caught my eye. This minor biographer, whose name is lost to history, but whose work was preserved through posterity, what a miracle, asked Bach, near the end of his life, Herr Bach, why do you write music? Now, not how do you write music or where do you get your inspiration? Why do you write music? Now, if you were Bach, what would you say? You might say something like, it's a living. I got 20 mouths to feed. You might say something glib like that, right? Here's what he said. The aim and final end of all music is nothing less than the glorification of God and the enjoyment of man. In other words, music is to glorify God and to serve my fellow men and women. That's what he was basically saying. And I thought to myself, can I say that? I mean, leave the religious part aside. I am a traditionally religious person. Not everybody is. Let's talk about the second half. Could I say, if somebody asked me, Brooks, why are you a French horn player? Would I say, for the service of my fellow man? No, I wouldn't have said that. Well, so I decided to do something else, and I went back and I studied, and I went to graduate school. I finished my bachelor's degree when I was 30. I married a girl, by the way, who had, when we first met, we married in Barcelona, and when I first met her, I unburdened myself that I had dropped out of college. I was feeling, and she starts laughing. I said, "Why are you laughing at me?" And she said, "Because I dropped out of high school." And she graduated from high school when she was 29, so we have kind of this checkered past. And I went back to graduate school, and I studied, and I became a college professor, and I asked myself again, when I was at Syracuse, if somebody said, Brooks, why are you teaching economics? Would I say, for the good of my fellow man? Kinda. But then I came to AEI 7 years ago as president of the American Enterprise Institute, and this is going to sound crazy to you, especially those of you who are really on a different plane from me politically. And that's a lot of you. I ask myself now, as the president of the American Enterprise Institute, an institute dedicated to American leadership and free enterprise. Do you do that work for the good of your fellow men and women? And for the first time in my life, the answer is yes. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to submit it to you for your consideration. And you might not agree with me, but I'm going to tell you why anyway, and I want you to understand. And that's really what I'm talking about here tonight. And then, after I tell you why, I want to talk to you about how all of us, no matter how we feel about politics and economics today, can bring ourselves together to have a more satisfying life and fight harder for the people who need us the most, which are the people who are not here tonight, because they're poor and because they're on the periphery of society. Those are my jobs here tonight over the next 30 minutes. So, Here's the reason that I think that my job is a service job today. And it really starts with the first time in my life that I saw poverty. I mean, really saw poverty. I grew up in Seattle. I'm a West Coast guy, in a lower middle class or working class neighborhood in Seattle. And there was poverty. I mean, it was like Santa Monica, but sort of downscale, not the nice parts of Santa Monica. It was, you know, a lot of people were on food stamps and welfare, and mostly people were single parent homes. But I remember the first time that I saw real poverty, not that, real poverty. I was early 1970s. I was a little kid. And my brother had the subscription to the National Geographic. And I remember flipping through it, just as a little kid, and I saw a picture of a kid in sub-Saharan Africa with flies on his face and a distended belly, and he was going to starve to death. Remember that picture? Some of you saw that, not that picture. Some of you, in about that time frame, experienced with your own eyes the vision, the perspective of somebody who was going to die of starvation with absolutely no fault whatsoever. And you had the same reaction that I did, which is, that's not right, but I can't do anything. Remember that feeling of impotence, of being unable to do anything to help? And all the times in your life when something isn't right and somebody is victimized by circumstance and you feel like you can't do anything, that feeling of desperation, of helplessness. So I remember that, and occasionally that thought will come back. So I grow up and I go to college and drop out and work and get married and start my family. And occasionally the vision comes back and I ask myself, what happened to that kid? Now, not that kid specifically. What happened to people that were under those truly desperate circumstances? Now, if you ask most Americans, what has happened to the poorest people in the world since 1970? 70% of Americans will say they've gotten poorer. 70% of Americans think there's more hunger in the world today than there was in 1970. Okay? Some of you probably would suspect that. That's wrong. That's wrong. Now, here's the reason that I am so pleased to be in the business of lifting people up through entrepreneurship and individual opportunity. Here's the reason. See, this is what I learned when I came to the Rand Graduate School. This is what I learned about world poverty. I learned that that was wrong. And here's the truth. From 1970 to today, the percentage of the world's population living on $1 a day or less, adjusted for inflation, obviously. The percentage of the world's population living at starvation's door has declined since I was a kid by 80%. There's been an 80% decline in starvation level poverty since I was a child. Now, when I learned that, I said, Eureka! Right? This is amazing. We have to talk about this. We have to learn about this. We have to know why. See, you know how many people that is, by the way, who've been pulled out of starvation level poverty since I was a kid? 2 billion. 2 billion people. That is a miracle. That is the greatest humanitarian achievement in the history of the human race. And it's happened during our lifetimes. Under our noses, most of us didn't even know it. So you got to ask yourself, what did that? Because if you don't know, you can't replicate it. And if you can't replicate it, you can't get the next 2 billion people. I got to know. So in Washington, D.C., typically people will say it was the success of the United Nations or the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank or U.S. foreign aid or central planning or, okay, now, good or bad things, you decide. But those aren't the reason that 2 billion people were pulled out of poverty. I will tell you something that all development economists know, and it doesn't matter if they're on the right or the left politically. Okay? This is a nonpartisan point entirely. There are 5 things that pulled 2 billion people out of poverty since I was a kid. Here they are. Globalization, free trade, property rights, the rule of law, and entrepreneurship. See, after 1970, the means of communication exploded around the world. We saw that kid, he saw us. See, people all over the world started to see each other for the first time. And we said, isn't it a pity? And he said, or people all over the world said, I want their freedom and I want their stuff. And they did what we did in this country. See, if you want to lift people out of poverty all over the world, alms for the poor are very important for your soul. But if you want to lift people out of poverty by the billions, including while you sleep, you got to have a system. And the only system that has ever done that, an imperfect system to be sure, a system that requires government and regulation and oversight, and most importantly, requires morals, is the free enterprise system. That's the reason I'm in this business, and it is my honor and privilege to stand before you today and confess this. Because that's what I want more people to know. That's it. I want more abundance so we can get the next 2 billion people together. But I need you, especially if you're not a political conservative. I need you to be a warrior in this fight for the poor, using the only system that has ever lifted people by the billions out of poverty. You got to join me. We got to do this together. Okay. Abundance. Not for us, for them. Now, that's great, and when I talk about this on college campuses, which I do all the time, I do about 175 speeches a year, okay? When you're the president of a think tank, it turns out there's relatively little thinking in tanks anymore. It's mostly traveling around talking to people, which is fantastic, which is great. And I talk on college campuses all the time, and college kids are great because they'll come up afterward and say, man, I'm all in. I'm all in. I want to be a warrior. I want to lift people up. I believe it. I think it's good. You know, this is not about politics. That's right. But, what? I'm worried. What? What are you worried about? I'm worried that this talk about capitalism and about free enterprise, that it's too materialistic, that it kind of is a hamster wheel, that it takes the life out of life, that it's too much about commerce and about business. And I don't know if I want that. I want more than that in my life. And I don't just hear that from college kids I talk to, by the way. I hear it from my own kids, because I have a house full of teenagers. Pray for me. and they want this too, and they're worried that if I talk, I'm an economist, if I talk about all the time about free enterprise and about capitalism and about commerce and business lifting people up, that it's really all about people working all the time and making more money. And doesn't that do some sort of harm to our souls? Now, I have to have an answer to that. Because if I don't have an answer to that, I'm no place with the people who need this the most, which is the next generation of warriors for the poor. Now, by the way, before you dismiss this, I want to tell you about a study. And it's a study that had a big impact on me. It came out in 2012. It was from the University of Rochester. 2 social psychologists had an ingenious research design to get at, to understand people's goals in life. People's goals in life are really very interesting because you want to know how they link up. The right goals, the wrong goals, how happy you are as people. So here's basically what they were looking at. They were talking to a big group of graduating seniors from the University of Rochester, and they asked them at age 22, it was a great design. They said, imagine yourself 5 years from now, 27 years old, and imagine that you're happy and successful, okay? See yourself happy and successful. What are you doing? Ingenious, right? Because it doesn't impose anything except happy and successful according to your definition of happiness and success. Now tell me what your life is like. What are you doing with your days? What are you pursuing? What are you thinking about? Okay. And then they recorded the answers and did a content analysis to figure out the kinds of goals that these people had. Now, they basically found 2 primary, people are complicated, they have lots of goals, but 2 primary goals in people's lives. They call these goals endogenous goals and exogenous goals. Why the fancy terms? Because they had to get tenure. And endogenous goals were about people and love and relationships. Half of the people, half of the kids, mostly women but not entirely, said, I want to have a good relationship with my family. I want to have a lot of friendships. Some of them said, I want to know God. A lot of them, believe it or not, this is going to be crazy to you. They said, I want to get married, right? Who knew, you know? And that's not what we think about, but that's what a lot of kids say privately. The other half, mostly men but not entirely, had exogenous goals. And I'm going to repeat the word endogenous a bunch of times, so I want you to remember it because I'm going to come back to this. But exogenous goals were about money. They were about stuff. They were about status. They were about power. I want to get rich and famous, okay? So 5 years from now, I want to be making more money than my peers. I want to be really successful financially. I want to be on the management track. I want to be going toward making partner or CEO. Those types of goals is what half the kids had. Okay, exogenous and endogenous, 50-50. They come back 5 years later. Okay, this is where it starts to get good. And they interview all these kids, and they found two things, good news and bad news. First, the good news. Everybody hit their goals. Remember your mother saying, careful what you wish for? Social science says it's true. You're going to hit your goals. Everybody hits their goals. The kids who said, I want to be rich and famous, they were making more money than their peers. They were on track to being in management. They had a lot of status relative to their experience. The kids who had endogenous goals, they had good relationships with their family. They had a lot of friendships. They had good religious ordering if they were interested in their spiritual lives. And, by the way, the ones who said they wanted to get married were virtually all either engaged or married. So, which is weird, right? Because you think that there's so much serendipity in that. It turns out there's less than we thought before. Okay, careful what you wish for. Good news, everybody hits their goals. Everybody hits their goals. Bad news, wrong goals, worse life. First, they looked at the kids who had these exogenous goals, and what they found: high levels of anger, high levels of tension, low levels of life satisfaction, low levels of happiness. Money, power, pleasure, honor, status, not good, not good. The kids who had endogenous goals about relationships and love and people, high levels of happiness, low levels of anger, low levels of tension and anxiety, low levels of headaches and stomach aches and other physical maladies. Careful what you wish for. Get the right goals is what this really comes down to. Okay, why do I bring up this study? Because that reinforces the anxiety that I hear from kids all over the place, including my own. If I'm just beating down everybody's doors about free enterprise all day long, I'm going to be effectively, whether I like it or not, encouraging people to be pursuing exogenous goals, and that's a mistake. I know that's a mistake. So how do I do this balance? How do I figure this out? A year and a half ago, this was really on my heart. I was thinking about, I didn't know how to talk about this. I mean, it was kind of an existential crisis for me. I'm like the president of the American Enterprise Institute. I don't know how to talk about capitalism anymore. And so I go to India all the time because we have a lot of work for my institute in India. We have a great India studies program. And furthermore, I have a wonderful relationship, a mentor-disciple relationship with the Dalai Lama. I work very closely with the Dalai Lama. I just came back 3 weeks ago from his home where we were doing a conference. You can look on our website if you're interested in the conversations that we had about morality in markets. It was really good stuff. And so I go a lot to India, and I talk to entrepreneurs, and I sit at the feet of the spiritual masters, and it's a wonderful experience. And I was on my way to India a year and a half ago, and this question was gripping me. How do I talk about abundance, but in a way that doesn't make people alienated through materialism? And I was with this guy that I work with. He's our India scholar. You read him in the Wall Street Journal if you read the Wall Street Journal. He's the India columnist. His name is Sadanand Dume. And we were sitting on the plane. We're on our way to Delhi. And I told him what was on my mind. I said, it's driving me crazy. I don't know how to talk about this. He says, well, he listens and he says, I got a guy you got to talk to. I said, you got a guy. You're right. And he said, when we get to Delhi, I'm going to hook you up with this guy. And I said, what's his name? And he said, his name is Swami Gyan Muni. And I said, you want me to go talk to a Swami about capitalism? He says, yeah, for sure. This guy is the best. As if I'm going to know the difference between a really good Swami and a not so good Swami. But he says, if Swamis were reviewed by Yelp, he'd have 5 stars, right? So we get to Delhi, and we set up an appointment with Swami Gyan Muni. And he's the administrator at this unbelievable temple called the Swaminarayanak Shardam Temple in Delhi. If you've ever been to Delhi, it's pretty much the most famous Hindu temple these days. It was cut by hand out of sheer stone by 10,000 stone-cutting artisans working for 7 years full-time. It's a wonder of the modern world. You can't believe your eyes how beautiful this is. It's enormous, too. And so, and I'm looking at this thing. It's a hot day in May, and I have this date with a Swami, and I see him coming across this courtyard toward me, and I have to tell you, I was very anxious because I didn't know if I would be able to express myself really well. I mean, these are subtle topics that we're talking about here, and I know he's going to speak some English, but are we going to be able to communicate? So I see him coming toward me, and he's got the shaved head and the orange flowing robes, and he's looking really mellow and meditative. And he gets about 3 yards away from me, about this far away, and he looks at me, and he says, "How you doing?" and I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Texas." And so it turns out that I've come to India to ask a Swami about capitalism, and he's from Texas, which is surreal, but it gets weirder. See, so he tells me his story. Turns out that he grew up in Houston. His parents were petroleum engineers, and they immigrated to Texas, and he was born in Houston. And his parents had highly exogenous goals for him. I mean, they wanted him to be really super successful, so they drove him from the day he was born. And he said he made him really proud. That he graduated from high school as a valedictorian when he was 16 years old, and he went to the University of Texas on a full scholarship, graduated in 3 years at the top of his class, and then he went to get an MBA. So I'm thinking, wait a second, I got a Swami with an MBA from Texas now. This is really weird. And he finished in a year, and he went to work for McKinsey as a consultant. And he said his first year he was making more money than his dad, and his dad was so proud of him. He said, "Son, you're doing exactly the right thing." And he said that there were certain sacrifices. He was working 100 hours a week, and he never saw his family, didn't have a girlfriend, didn't really have any relationships, but they were so proud of him because they had these exogenous goals. And he said he did this for a long time. He's 20 years old at this point. He did it for 6 years. He wakes up on his 26th birthday, and he says, "Is this it? I mean, am I just going to be on the hamster wheel for the rest of my life? Is it just about money, or is there more?" So he decided to go on his own quest, kind of like mine, to figure out meaning. And he set himself as a goal to pray about this for a revelation every day for 6 months. He came from a very pious Hindu family. He prayed about it every day for 6 months. And after 6 months, he decided to sell everything, give all his money to the poor, go to India, enter a Hindu seminary, and become a sadhu, a penniless, renunciant Hindu monk. So now I realize I'm talking to not just a Swami from Texas with an MBA, but one who gave it all up because capitalism is a sham, man. It's a man-made prison. So I know I'm in trouble because I've come to ask him a question, and I'm not going to like the answer. But I asked him anyway. I said, "Swami, is capitalism good?" And he said, "No. It's great. It is the only system that has pulled people out of poverty in my country by the hundreds of millions." Now, I'm on the other side of the question at this point. I'm feeling like I'm not getting to the bottom of it. I said, "But look at you." I said, "You gave it all up because it is a sham, because you needed to renounce it, because it was ruining your life." And he said, I said, "Isn't money bad for your soul?" And by the way, he's calling me dude. So, he said, "Dude, the problem isn't money. The problem is attachment to money." And this sounded really super Eastern to me. Attachment, by the way. There's a word in Sanskrit, the Sanskrit language. The word is upadana. It means the sticky craving of inadequate things, right? I mean, it's just so evocative, things that stick to you that are inadequate. That's what attachment really is. And it sounds really very Eastern, not Western at all. But I thought about it, and that's not right. See, I grew up in a Christian home, and I'm a Christian. And let me tell you, the most misunderstood and misquoted Christian scripture. It comes from St. Paul's first letter to Timothy, chapter 6, verse 10. Here's how it's misquoted. Money is the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. Now, by the way, if you prefer the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes 5:10, he who loves money never has enough of it. Isn't that the truth? It doesn't matter what you're looking at. Any secular or religious tradition that has well-grounded ethics and understands higher consciousness will tell you the same thing. The problem is not abundance. The problem is attachment to material things. It's the love of material things. That's what he said. He said, dude, do you want the secret of happiness? And I said, yes, Swami, tell me. And he said, it's abundance without attachment. That's the secret of happiness. And by the way, he put it in these terms. He said, you want a Mercedes? Buy a Mercedes. Don't love your Mercedes. Remember that. Now, you got to ask yourself, as I often have since that sort of fateful day, why is it that we don't remember that? Because your mom taught you that. You all knew that, but we forget that. Why do we forget that? Why do we forget abundance without attachment? Why do we become attached with sticky cravings to the inadequate things? Why do we seek those things? And I have an answer. There's a conspiracy. Now, I'm a conservative, so I believe in a lot of conspiracies, obviously. And it's a conspiracy. And basically, here's what it is. Watch TV. Go to the movies. Look at anything from Madison Avenue. You know what the formula for a happy life is? In a nutshell, here's what it is. Use people, love things. That's the worldly formula for a happy life. And you know in your heart that it's wrong. You know that the real formula for a happy life is to invert that formula. Love people and use things. Use things all day long. Don't love them. Only love people. That is abundance without attachment. Resist, rebel against the conspiracy, and you will set yourself free. That's what the Swami taught me. Okay, now, this is all well and good, but if I'm going to do my job in the last 10 or 12 minutes that I've got with you before we turn it over to you for your protest statements, I'm going to need to give you some suggestions on how to bring this to real life. I need to give you a couple of ideas that if you follow these ideas of abundance without attachment, in practical life, you will be happier starting tonight. That's what I need to do. So I'm going to give you two suggestions on the basis of my studies in India and in the United States. What are two things that you can do to live abundance without attachment? Practice number one of abundance without attachment. Think in your head about the physical, material thing to which you are most attached. Okay? Give it away. Charity is the act of rebellion against attachment. It's unnatural. But if you go against your natural tendency toward attachment, if you rebel against that nature, if you show yourself to be a rebel, you will, through charity, find the detachment that you seek. For years, I did work on charitable giving. One of the topics of my dissertation here was charitable giving. And charitable giving is really interesting. When I was at Syracuse, I did a lot of academic papers, statistically sophisticated economic papers about charitable giving. And at one point, I wrote, after I first got tenure at the university, and tenure means that you have more job security than a French bureaucrat. So I could do anything that I wanted. And I decided I was going to write a commercial book about charitable giving. And I was going to ask this really contentious question. Who says they give and who really gives, right? Very contentious, right? Because it turns out they're not the same people. And I asked, who gives more? Rich people, poor people, religious people, secular people, old people, young people, Democrats or Republicans, right? It's going to be controversial no matter what you find, right? And sure enough, it was controversial when it first came out. I mean, I'd written 5 books before that, but they were all, terrible and nobody read them. This was the first time that I wrote a book that humans read. And furthermore, a week after I wrote it, I found myself on Rush Limbaugh's radio show, which was a source of consternation for my friends in the faculty lounge, as you can imagine. So my life was changing a lot. But it turns out that all the controversy wasn't what was really on my mind when I wrote that book. It was a research finding that I had come up with that I just couldn't understand. And here's what it was. I had been looking at large data sets of Americans across tons of communities over lots of years, and I kept finding in the data that the more money you give away, the richer you get. How can that be? Now, I knew it was wrong. I mean, when you get your PhD, you don't learn that the best way to get rich is give all your money away. That's not what you learn. That's not proper microeconomics. So I knew that I was doing something wrong with my data. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it was on my mind. And by the way, this is a standard academic conundrum. I had theory that says that you give your money away, you have less of it, and I had data that said you give your money away and you have more of it. Right? So I had conflict between theory and data. So I did what college professors always do, which is I threw away my data. and I just, I adhered to the theory, but I couldn't get it out of my head. Until finally I was having lunch with another professor, a psychologist who did the same work as me, work in the same area, charitable giving. And I said, I got a problem. Which is what people say to psychologists all the time. But I said, my problem is a data problem. I know it's wrong, so tell me what I'm doing wrong. I keep finding that the more money you give away, the richer you get. And it's causal, according to my estimations. And he said, well, duh, we've known that for 30 years. I said, what? He said, well, in psychology, we don't look at you getting richer after you give your money away. We look at something much more important, which was the real currency of people's lives. We know that you get happier when you give your money away. And of course, when you get happier, it lowers your stress hormones, it raises your self-efficacy, and people see you in a different light. And of course, you make more money when that happens. Light bulb, ding. I should have known this, right? I mean, I'm a social scientist. I should have known this, but I was blinded by these preconceived notions, these relationships that I always thought I understood but didn't. And once I saw this, once I understood it, saw it for what it was, then I saw it every place. These remarkable correlations in the data and studies all over the place. The more money you give, the richer you get. The more money you give and the more you volunteer, the happier you get, the healthier you get. My favorite studies, the more money you give, the better looking you get. It's true. It turns out it's true. So, and the way that they study it is these guys at the University of Liverpool, they have a great experiment where they ask guys to come into the laboratory with their wives, right? And they come in, and some of the guys have been married for a month, and some of the guys for 50 years, right? You got to come in with your wife, and you start off at this place with a guy with a white lab coat, and he puts a bunch of change in the husband's pocket, and he says, simple experiment. You got to walk from this building to that building over there, and my colleague is going to do a short interview of both of you, and then you go, and you get to keep the change. That's it. Simple. So they set off, each couple, jingle, 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 on this path to the next building, and there's an alleyway between the buildings, and there's a homeless guy who comes wandering out of the alleyway, and he panhandles the husband, right? Hey, buddy, you got some change? Right? Now, the husband, he does have change, right? And so he's got to make a decision. Am I going to give the homeless guy some change, and how much? And he makes the decision, and they go on to the next building, and the guy with the other white lab coat's waiting for him. And he asked the husband, did you give him some change, and how much? And then he asked the wife, how handsome do you find him right now? Right? Why? They want to find a correlation between your generosity with the guy in need and how much your wife likes you. And what do they find? The more you give them, the more she likes you. News you can use. In Santa Monica, right? So, okay. You'll thank me later. Okay, so do you want to have an act of rebellion against your attachment? Then think about the material thing to which you are most attached. Give it away. Okay. Number two, act of abundance without attachment. Stop thinking about the price of things. Start investing in endogenous relationships. Remember what endogenous relationships are? Love, people, friendships. Start investing your scarce resources in the relationships with people that you love. Some of you are with those people right now. Are you spending your money in the right way? Look, we all have money. We all have resources. It's our time. It's our stuff. It's what we earn. How are you spending? Are you wasting it on the articles of attachment, or are you cultivating the endogenous relationships that we know from the University of Rochester study will give you the best life? got to answer this question. Years ago, I've been married for 24 years. And 23 years ago, and some change, my wife and I were having a bitter argument, knockdown, drag-out fight about, ironically, how to spend our first wedding anniversary. And here's the nature of the problem that we were having. We had no money. Okay, we had no money. It's like you look at the checking account, they're like tumbleweeds going through it. And we figured out that despite the fact that we had no resources, my wife was working a minimum wage job, and I was desperately just trying to get my bachelor's degree and trying to start our lives, basically, that we figured out we could borrow or beg or coerce people into giving us just enough money to do one of two things. Either we could go away to the beach for 3 days to celebrate our anniversary, or we could get a couch. And we didn't have a couch. So there was this disagreement. My wife, who's from Barcelona, is all about the beach. And I'm a thrifty, practical American, so I'm all about the couch. And we were going back and forth. Beach, couch, beach, couch, beach, couch. And finally, we came to a grand compromise. And we went to the beach. It's been 24 happy years, my friends. So, and we were looking back on it 20 years later, and something came to us that it turns out the psychologists understand very well. It's called the paradox of things. We realized that if we'd gotten the couch, which we ultimately did, by the way, I mean, we have a couch now, but the couch that we ultimately bought was at the dump 10 years later or something, and I don't really remember what color it was. But I can tell you every hour that we spent on that weekend. I can tell you everything we did. It's etched into my mind, on my heart, because we love each other. And this is something that we did. It's permanent. Here's the paradox of things. The things that you think are permanent, the things that you think are evanescent, if they're with the people you love, are permanent. That's what we need to remember if we want to free ourselves from these attachments and we want truly endogenous relationships that give us the joy that we seek. Now, there's a lot of examples of this. I could give you a lot of 12 or 1,200 studies. I'm not going to bother you with that. But I will bring up one example that comes from the business world, which is the most successful credit card commercial in the history of the credit card industry. It's for MasterCard. You've all seen it. It's been running for 25 straight years. And it's very annoying, but it's successful. And they all work the same way. They update them every year so they look modern. And there's no dialogue. There's just a voiceover, right? And for example, there's a guy getting into a car with a kid, and the voiceover says, beach ball, $3. Gas for the car, $36. 2 nights in a hotel, $275. The weekend alone at the beach with my son. It's just an ad. There's truth in that. That's why it's effective. Because even though it annoys you, it touches you because you know it speaks truth and you want that truth. Again, I'll give you all the studies you want. I'll simply tell you the study that brought this home to me once and for all. I told you I got 3 teenagers. My middle son, his name is Carlos, and he's 15, and he's a piece of work. I mean, everybody's got a Carlos. Right? I mean, everybody's got one. And, we're the last December, we're having this really bad parent-teacher conference, and it's a grades issue for Carlos, right? And afterward, my wife and I are really silent, and we're in the car, and we're really worried. And finally, my wife, who's an optimist, she says, here's how we need to think about it. At least we know he's not cheating. So that's Carlos, right? And so Carlos, he comes to me, and when he's 9, it was 6 years ago, he comes to me in the fall, and he says, Dad, I've been thinking about Christmas. And immediately I'm on the defensive, because I know he's got something going on. And so I'm trying to put him off the trail. I'm saying, well, it's good to have Christmas in your heart all year round, Carlos? You know, things like that to change the subject, kind of, and he's having none of it. And he says, no, Dad, you don't understand. I'm not here to ask you for something. I've been thinking about Christmas, and all I want this year is to go away fishing alone with you. Huh. And I'm thinking, that costs 19 times more than a bike. You know, Father of the Year. So, so that's not what I said. I said, let's do that. Let's do that. And we did it. And we've done it every year since. Between Christmas and New Year's, every year we go away hunting and fishing. And this year on 26th, you know what I'm going to tell you, because I got every detail in my head, because it's permanent. We're going to go away to Marble Falls, Texas. And we're going to sit in a deer stand, and we're probably not going to see anything. And we're going to have a great time together. We're going to go bass fishing in the afternoons. And we're going to remember it for the rest of our lives. And he says, Carlos says, Dad, when you're older, thanks. Dad, when you're older, I'm going to take you every year for Christmas. See, that's it, isn't it? Isn't that it? That is the endogenous life. That is the unattached life. That is the use of abundance that really honestly matters. So where are we? I did two things tonight. I tried to do two things tonight. Number one, I made my case for abundance. And here's what it is. We need it, and we need a system that brings it, and it's not for me, and it's not for you. It's for them, because they are us. And we have a solidarity obligation that's moral to bring abundance to everybody, to lift them up so they can enjoy the things that we enjoy as well, to set people free. That's the reason for free enterprise, is because there are still poor people out there, and we have an obligation to work for them. That's my case for abundance. And I made the case for non-attachment because you deserve to be happy too. It's not enough to talk about abundance for people who need it, who are not here. You also need to be unattached, because you deserve to have joy in your lives and joy in your hearts. We all deserve this, and we have to work for it together. So join me. This is a new movement, and I understand there's a lot of contentious politics flying around, and I know that there's a lot of bitterness and there's a lot of disagreement on specific public policy issues, but let's agree on this. Let's bring abundance to more people, and let's bring non-attachment to ourselves. This is beyond right and left. This is a way that we can spread joy around the world and bring joy to ourselves. And if we do this, the country gets better and the world gets better, and it starts with us. So if we can do this together, we're going to lift people up. And we're going to like our lives better. And for doing that, for the joy it brings to me in the way that you live your lives through these principles, all I can say is God bless you and thank you. So we have time for some questions, and we have one of the reasons that I love the Milken Institute, and I have to say give my sincere gratitude to this great organization that has done so much for better public policy. It's also leading the way for how to do a question and answer period. But by the way, sir, if you got a heckle, that's all good too. That's right, because we're going to be having a little bit of general communication here about some of these ideas that I've had. But if you don't agree, that's great too. That's great too. Then heckle me, sir, and then we'll go to this first question here. Thank you, sir. See, I like that kind of heckling. That's pretty good stuff. Okay, what is the single most significant thing that you have learned from the Dalai Lama? Now, I've learned a lot from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. One of the most important things that I've learned is that there is no gap that's too wide to bridge between people if relationships are fundamentally predicated on the concept of warm-heartedness. Now, I know it sounds kind of trite, right? It sounds like a Hallmark card, but think about it. Think about it. You can bring gratitude and warm-heartedness to your relationships to others. And if you predicate all of your connections with other people on that, there is more love, there is less bitterness, there is more communication. The Dalai Lama has reinforced this again and again. There's nothing that's too contentious for us to discuss. The Dalai Lama is not a right-wing capitalist. The Dalai Lama is a Buddhist monk. When we talk about the things that are really contentious in American politics, it doesn't exactly make sense to him, as a matter of fact, because it's so far outside of his milieu, to be sure. But he reminds me that no matter who I'm talking to, no matter what the subject, if I approach it in a manner of warm-heartedness, it's better. And I'm going to tell you kind of how I think about it. Okay? Because when the Dalai Lama tells you something, it's best if you can bring it home using examples from your own cultural ecosystem. So the most important, for me, the most profound book that all of us have read and most of us have forgotten, with a terrible title, by the way, is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. You heard it here. From the president of the American Enterprise Institute is suggesting this ridiculous book, right? It's not ridiculous. Read it again. It's a book about ethical living. It's a book about how to be a good person. And here's the warm-heartedness that made that really came home to me, that helped me to understand the Dalai Lama's great lesson to me. It was a story about a magician in the 1920s in Broadway. His name was Howard Thurston. He was the most famous magician of his day. And Dale Carnegie interviewed him and said, how do you keep it fresh after pulling the rabbit out of the hat every single night for 40 years? I mean, people are coming in from the heartland, from Wisconsin, and they want to go see a magician, and every night it just looks fresh and great, right? 40 years. I mean, you'd be so bummed out after a while. Say, these rubes, all right, fine, right? No. It was like it was the first night every single night. How do you do it? He said, oh, it's simple. He said, every night before I go out, I say to myself in my dressing room, I am truly grateful for the people who came here to see me, because they make it possible for me to make my living doing something that I love. That's the basis of warm-heartedness. That, by the way, my friends, is what I said to myself, and I thanked God for you before I came out. Because here's just the crazy thing. I'm making my living right now. It's insane. I get to do this and talk about ideas and talk about goodness and lifting people up, and it's because of you. Thank you. We got somebody from England here because they say whilst. How do you get people to understand that whilst democracy and free enterprise has its warts, it is the best system we have to alleviate poverty and create prosperous societies? The way that we do that, number one, is by remembering the reason for capitalism. Now, I talked about the reason for our work, the why of our work, right? What's the why of capitalism? It's not to make rich people richer. It's to make poor people less poor. That's the why of capitalism. And if it's not doing that, we're not doing it right. That's how we bring this home to people. Now, you have to start by saying, what is the system that has lifted people up? And giving people the evidence that this is what has lifted people up. And that's what I have tried to do here this evening. But you have to be pure in your motives as well. Your motives are critically important, because you can say, this is the best way to pull people out of poverty, but by the way, the only reason I like it is because it makes me richer. You really have to want to do that first. And another lesson from the Dalai Lama, you know, the 4 principles of a happy life in Tibetan Buddhism, which I've had a privilege to study at this point, the 4 principles: spirituality, enlightenment, worldly satisfaction, wealth. Crazy, right? Now, okay, I understand spirituality and enlightenment. I got it, right? But worldly satisfaction, what does that mean? You have an obligation to enjoy your life. Words from the Dalai Lama to live by. Number 4, wealth. I said, Your Holiness, and you can see this when this stuff comes online in the next week on our website. Your Holiness, what is wealth? What is wealth? Define wealth. He says, it's the ability to serve people more. That's the definition of wealth. And if that's the case, then the reason for free enterprise is lifting other people up. The reason for education is lifting other people up. The reason for love is lifting other people up. The reason for all the valuable things in our life is to be able to pass them on, to share them. The reason for your faith is in something that you love is to share it with others. That's the point, and that is the secret to helping people understand that our motives are pure and we believe in free enterprise because we truly want to help others. can you relate your prescriptions to the resentment so many Americans feel about globalization? I understand the problems that people have with globalization. I get it. I get it. Because you know what? Nothing comes without costs. Nothing. You know, I travel all around the United States and internationally a lot. And when I'm traveling around the United States and I'm not in fancy places, you know, I'm from Seattle and we're in Santa Monica and I live in Washington, D.C. and I spend a lot of time in New York. It's really, really easy to say, globalization, sensational, makes everybody richer, brings the world together, it's terrific, right? And the only resentment you're going to hear toward it is that it might it might hurt the environment or something. And then we have to talk about ways to attenuate the harm that we create to the environment, et cetera. But that's not the big resentment that people have. You know what it is? You know the problem with globalization? Somebody wants to come and take my job and do it cheaper someplace else. If we don't have any sort of sympathy for that, shame on us, because people actually are hurt by that. I understand that resentment, and you should understand that resentment too, and I bet you do. The problem is having an answer for it, right? Right? You talk to the presidential candidates, which I have a great privilege of doing a lot. They don't have an answer for this. They don't know. They kind of change the subject, right? There is an answer to this. You need to be a creative country that understands that when people are displaced, we can make them assets to develop in other areas, but only if we believe in people not as liabilities to manage, but as assets to develop at every phase of their life. And that means we need truly to reform our education system that meets every single person no matter where they are. And we're not doing anything like that. What are we doing about vocational and technical education? Nothing. What are we doing about apprenticeships? Nothing. What are we doing about workers who are displaced? Nothing. What are we doing about people with disabilities for education that goes all throughout their adult lives? Nothing. We're doing nothing. We have a colossal, unionized, K through 12, unreformed education system that's leaving 25% of the population behind because they're poor. And it's not right. If we actually started to think creatively about meeting everybody where they are, and when they're displaced, picking them up and training them more and more to be assets that we value, upon which we build our society. Huge point, by the way. When did we stop saying and believing, give me your huddled masses? Because we stopped at some point. We don't want huddled masses anymore. Huddled masses are a pain and they're a liability to manage at this point. If we remembered that this is the basis on which every single one of your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents came, huddled, some way, shape, or form, riffraff, which is all what we are, then we would be able to reform a system that is truly globalized and where we're not worried about letting people start from here and taking them to the next phase in their lives by building their human capital, no matter what their abilities are, what they know, and what their age is. And we're not even close to a system like that, and that's the reason we don't have an answer. What if the future of technology-based capitalism doesn't bring widespread success? For example, Facebook and GE have similar market caps, but Facebook has just 10% of the people. That's a big problem, my friends. One of the biggest reasons for displacement of people of relatively low education, relatively low skill, high-tech skill in particular, in America, is the fact that we need fewer and fewer traditional hours of labor and more units of productive thinking and creativity in the modern economy. And that leaves a lot of people behind. What's the answer to that? Believe it or not, there's an answer to this too. It's not that we have to force Facebook to hire 90% more people so they can look more like GE. That's an exercise in futility. You don't want to do that. The answer is, once again, remembering that there are entire parts of our economy that are dignified and they're productive and they're not being filled because we don't take them seriously. So today, this very day, there are 300,000 unfilled skilled welding jobs in America. 300,000. Why are they unfilled? Because we have an entire elite class in Washington, D.C. that says if you don't go to college, you're going to end up in a dead-end job and you're kind of a loser. Right? That's what we have. We have a culture that says you're not worth as much as a person if you don't have a college education. That's a big mistake. That's a big mistake. Let me tell you, if I had forced another 3 years of a college education after I dropped out, it would have been a total disaster. I needed what my parents called my gap decade to get my act together, right? But a lot of people, they can do really, look, I live in Montgomery County, Maryland. It takes 6 weeks to get gutters put on your house because nobody does that, right? Why does nobody do that? Because we have a culture that doesn't lead people to doing that. There are a host of things that you can't outsource. You can't outsource people's gutters to be put on their house to India. It can't happen, yet we're not training people to do those things. We need a society, and it starts with us, every person in this room, and we need to say to ourselves, it is equally morally worthy to be a hedge fund manager and to trim hedges. And when we can actually say that and mean it, we're well on our way to having an actual coexistence between working at Facebook and putting together cabinets. And that's a good society, and that's one that we currently don't have. They don't have to make the same amount of money. We can do a lot better than we do now. Is love of money a necessary component to drive innovation? Is greed a necessary component to drive innovation? It's a good question. No. The central ingredient of free enterprise must not be greed, because greed is evil, because greed is a tyranny. The central ingredient is aspiration. That's what drives people. See, I wrote a textbook one time called Social Entrepreneurship, which I don't recommend to you, but it's got a great title. And social entrepreneurship, it's about entrepreneurs who are accumulating something besides money, right? They're driven, they have the same psychological profile, and they're driven in exactly the same way as commercial entrepreneurs. And you would look at those guys and say, what a bunch of do-gooders. They're not greedy, they're not trying to get rich at all. They're the same. They're basing their entire business model on the same kind of aspiration. And let me tell you, societies that are based on greed will not persist. Societies that are based on aspiration can do truly great things. Now, I want to make one more point that's related to this. That I emphasized it a little bit earlier. I want to re-emphasize it right now. When we talk about greed, you're basically putting a flimsy foundation on the free enterprise system. Why? Because you've sheared it off from morals. There is no moral system that's nutritious and correct in all of human society that says greed is good. That's nothing more than a line from the movie Wall Street, right? It is nothing more than a caricature of what entrepreneurs are all about. And you know, there are some people who are motivated by greed. But let me tell you, as an historical matter, as an intellectual historical matter, what the free enterprise system is really made of. Adam Smith, the patron saint of modern market economics, wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. Important year in American history, but also in the Scottish Enlightenment. 1776, The Wealth of Nations. We all know that book in economics. It talks about the invisible hand. It talks about the importance of markets. It talks about pursuing self-interest, not selfishness, self-interest, right? That wasn't his most important book. His most important book was written 17 years earlier, and it was The Theory of Moral Sentiments. It talks about what we can do to earn the right to be a free people with free markets. It's based on our concept of our society and the obligations that we have to each other morally. It's the love that we can have and the brotherhood and the solidarity. It is, in the vernacular of the Dalai Lama, the warm-heartedness that is the glue that holds our society together. Because if we don't have it, if we don't have moral sentiments, we will never truly and permanently have the wealth of nations. This is my point. Morals come before markets. What's next? How do you convince see, it's going off and on, I'm sorry here. How do you convince the Tea Party folks to talk more convincingly about poor people? You know, I told you I do a lot of college campus talks. I also do a lot of, talks in groups called things like the Tea Party Patriots of the Three-Cornered Hat and stuff like that. And, it's really conservative groups where everybody is super fiscally conservative, a Tea Party type. Not in Santa Monica, not in Santa Monica. That'd be like one guy, right? And anyway, that's in Manchester, New Hampshire. That's where, that's in Iowa and places that are between where I live and where you live. And one of the things, let me tell you, the biggest mistake that conservatives make today, okay, the biggest single mistake, the single biggest thing that they think that's not correct today. And I say this as a political conservative, by the way, okay? They often will say that people just want free stuff. I've heard it a million times. You know, people will say, look, professor, I hear your whole shtick. You know, and I got it, but it'll never work. Why not? Because people just want their free stuff. That is incorrect. That is factually untrue. Now, there are people who are lazy. I mean, everybody's got a brother-in-law on the couch someplace. You know, I got it. But that is not the norm. Look, I've worked in communities of poverty, and a bunch of you have too. And you never hear somebody say, I wish my kids would see me get a welfare check instead of a paycheck. Nobody ever says that. Poor people don't think that way. The reason that people take free stuff is because they're desperate and they don't see opportunity and they don't see another way. And you know what? I'm really lucky because I have a salary and it's a good salary. But if I were poor and I had kids and I didn't know if I was going to have to decide between food and medicine, I'd take free stuff too. And so would you. The point is, people will take free stuff, but they prefer aspiration, and we have a moral obligation to assume that our fellow Americans want aspiration, and they will go for it all day long. And I believe it's true, and I've seen the data that think that that's true as well. And that's the way that we rewrite the incorrect code on the hearts of a lot of conservatives, such that we can all be together in this great experiment. Look, let's just disagree on the level of taxation, right? Because liberals and conservatives are going to disagree on that. Who cares? Let's agree on the nature of what people want and how they're morally wired. Let's agree on that, and then we have a moral consensus pushing opportunity down to the people who need it the most. And all the disagreements that everybody in this room has, you know what it is? It's called a competition of ideas and not a holy war. Imagine that. Crazy stuff, right? So the way that you talk to Tea Party folks is the same way that you talk to Bernie Sanders followers. And you say, let's agree the stuff of what humans are made of and not vilify each other, and remember that we all kind of want the same things. And since that's the case, then we can compete on the competition of ideas and not talk about somebody who's in a different set of circumstances as if they were inherently a bad person. That's poor people when you're talking to Tea Partiers, that's Wall Street bankers when you're talking to Bernie Sanders followers, and that's all of us to some other group, because we're all the same. You are me, and I am you. Let's see, I keep looking out for the audience, but I have to look down here. What's your take on the events on college campuses? Yale, Princeton, Claremont. Is there free speech in academia? Oh yeah, there's free speech in academia. These are not the norm. I mean, you see that these absurd protests that are going on where we have to make sure that somebody who has a politically incorrect opinion must be shut down. I bet there's nobody in this room who agrees with that. I bet that we're all for free speech and free expression of ideas. We're also, by the way, none of us is for hurting people and discriminating and being a bigot. Let's just agree on this. We all want free speech and free expression, and we want people to be good people and not hurt each other, right? Now, these things clash sometimes, and we have to find some sort of boundaries of respect for each other and good manners, to be sure. What's happened on college campuses? We've swung too far in one particular direction, where you have administrations that are freaking out and letting demonstrators dictate a whole set of free speech norms that are antithetical to true free speech. It's not what's going on every campus. It's not what's going on most campuses, and it's going to go away, and it's going to teach people a couple of different lessons. Number one, we can't actually let these excesses take over the arguments like we're seeing right now. We have to guard against them. And number two, we have to have a better way to have people be able to express the discomfort that they feel from what they feel is real discrimination on these campuses. And we're going to be able to do those things. I'm actually incredibly optimistic. I'm optimistic that we're going to solve this problem and the whole thing is going to be better. Now, a lot of conservatives are very pessimistic because they think that this is, just the beginning of the, this is the first zombie of the apocalypse coming into your house or something like that. No. This is basically an opportunity to air something that's been bubbling up for a long time, and I actually see how we're going to, I actually honestly believe that we're going to be able to solve this. Now, we do need, let me tell you what we need on campuses. And I've written about this in the Times. We need more diversity, real diversity, intellectual diversity, idea diversity. Imagine that, right? Where not everybody on a college campus thinks the same way. Frank is sitting out here. Frank and I have been friends for a long time. And we've been working together. We've worked together at Berkeley. And he sponsors a lecture series to get diversity of ideas on Berkeley. Berkeley's not the most diverse place, by the way. we actually need more of that. And the only way we're going to get more diversity, intellectual diversity and political diversity on campuses, you know the only way it's going to happen? Not going to happen from guys like me. Because a guy like, I'm the president of the American Enterprise Institute, and guess what? I think you need to hire more conservatives. Duh. We need those of you who are committed progressives to become militants for more intellectual diversity. If you can do that, if you can actually do that, they're going to listen. If you're on the board of your college and you say and they know you're a hardcore leftist, they know it, and you say, when is the last time you actually interviewed a conservative? For social psychologists and social scientists in academia, 14-1 left versus right, 14-1. And by the way, according to the best research, and this is in the Journal of Social Psychology, just came out, 79% of psychologists in academia admit that they would discriminate against somebody with equal qualifications because they are a political conservative. That is a highly discriminatory environment, and progressives are the ones that should rebel against that the most. So I urge you to do that. I recommend that to you for your consideration if you're on the political left, on how you can make a difference and improve our universities today. America has a love affair with fame and wealth that's propagated by the media. God bless you. Reality TV stars, rock stars, and athletes, etc., with little or no moral integrity. What are the tangible methods to combat this form of capitalism to create real abundance for those who seek it? This question basically says that everybody in the entertainment industry, which is like a third of you, have no morals. So, so sorry. The point is, America's got a love affair with fame and wealth that's propagated by the media. Again, that's the conspiracy. That's the conspiracy. That's the easy out. That's the formula. Use people, love things. Oh, and by the way, worship yourself. That's what naturally comes up when we have a materialistic environment. And it's also, interestingly, what happens when it's possible for fame to occur, which is a very unnatural phenomenon. If you go back 1,000 years, basically nobody was famous 1,000 years because you couldn't get famous. Famous meant that the people on your side of town kind of knew who you were. But there's no way, I mean, think about how ordinary people can get famous. There is a need, an almost primeval need, and there's good evolutionary biology that understands why people tried to get famous in the first place. Some of you have probably you've enjoyed a little bit of fame. Some of you a little bit more than a little bit of fame in your lives. It's not fun. It's something that you want and then don't like. Talk to anybody who's really famous. It sounds fun, you want it, and you don't like it. That's the paradox of fame. Now, why is that? And the answer is, according to evolutionary biologists, it's because getting more famous makes it more possible for you to pass on your genes. That's basically what it is. It's like having more animal skins and arrowheads or something. It gives you more status. And so there's this evolutionary imperative for people to know who you are. It's something that's wired into our genes. Here's the problem. Your genes, Mother Nature doesn't care if you're happy. Mother Nature wants you to pass on your genes. It doesn't matter if it's correlated with happiness or not. That's the paradox. If you want to be smart about these things, ignore the evolutionary imperative and listen to the dictates of a satisfying life, which go orthogonal to each other in the case of fame and power. Okay? And that means you got to be smart about rebelling against yourself. The day you declare peace on your nature, the day that you declare that the war is over with your urges is the day you lose, is what it comes down to. Now, I realize that's just super Catholic. I got that, right? I got it. Yeah, I know. It's like, yeah, the guy from AEI came here and told us to be at a war with ourselves. That's right. And now let's all go to church. So, no, But that is actually, as an evolutionary matter, something that I would urge to you for your consideration. We've gotten into basically a framework of thinking that if it feels good, do it. That is exactly wrong and stupid advice, especially when it comes to fame, especially when it comes to these particular goals. You have an obligation and an opportunity to be a happy person and spread happiness all around you through goodness. And that means rebelling against those urges while at the same time doing the things that make you successful such that you can lift other people up. And how you do that, it's in your hands. It's in your hands. Time for one more, and then, and Toby, my colleague from AEI, is pointing at his watch, and I think it's the universal symbol of stop talking. So, okay, and also I'm going to sign some books for those of you who want them. It seems that it's impossible for different sides in Washington to work together for common good, and it's gotten worse in recent years. Do you think there's a hope for a change in that? Yeah, I actually do. It's going to take leadership. So, the most discouraging thing in Washington over the past 10 years, from my point of view, is not, the election of President Obama or anything like that. It doesn't matter who I voted for. It doesn't matter who you voted for. Here's what really depresses me. President Obama, he campaigned in 2008 beautifully on the basis of unity and optimism. It doesn't matter if you're a conservative or a progressive. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You know in your heart that his message of unity and optimism was really good and right. Now, a lot of you didn't vote for him because you disagree with his policy ideas, but you wanted his unity and optimism. We all did, right? We all did. The problem is we haven't gotten that governance. Now, some of you are going to say it's because Obama is a divisive, pessimistic leader. And some of you are going to say, no, he's not. The Republicans got in his way. They didn't let anything happen. Okay, disagree, right? That's fine. But the point is, I'm right when I say that we have had governance by pessimism and division over the past. That's what depresses me, is when we were promised unity and optimism, and for whatever reason, we got pessimism and division instead, right? So what do we need? We need breakout leadership. We need somebody who breaks out of the iron cage of competing pessimisms. And the only way that happens is by looking, by the way, the case studies, who've been able to do that? Bill Clinton did that. Ronald Reagan did that. Lyndon Johnson did that. These are partisan people, by the way, really partisan, especially look at Reagan and Johnson. The two most partisan presidents, arguably, in the past 50 years, Reagan and Johnson. What did they do? They actually broke out of the iron cage and worked flexibly with the other side on the basis of shared moral interest, which was creating more opportunity for people at the bottom. And when that happened, once again, the competition of ideas was not a holy war. If you take the competition of ideas out of the middle, if you take the moral consensus out of the middle of the policy competition, it collapses, and the competing ideas hit each other head on, and that's what the holy war is that we're looking at. That means we have to reinflate the moral consensus in Washington, and that takes visionary, positive, optimistic leadership. Now, can we do that? Yes. Will we? I don't know. I mean, I look at who's leading the Republican field, and I think, I don't know what's going on, right? But I still look, I hold out hope. I hold out hope because I know a lot of the other people that are in this, and they do want what's right, and they do want what's good. And if they hear from you, maybe they'll listen to you too. And they say, what should we do? And you say, love each other. Make sure that you're talking about the poor. Build this country up for people who need it the most. Build a moral consensus of pushing opportunity to the people who need it the most. And I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. Do it your Democrat or Republican way, and that's the kind of visionary leadership that will rebuild this consensus. I think it can get done. It's going to rely on us. Thank you again.
Thank you, and please join Arthur for the book signing over to the right.